So, Black Lives Matter activist and professional race baiter Shaun King decided to weigh in on a recent incident that took place at a basketball game. I'm going to get into what happened with the basketball game in a little bit, but it's my intention also to discuss the issue of sports logos in general, particularly when it comes to racism. Anyway, but let me get first of all to what it is that he said that led to me going ahead and making this. Y'all not ready to talk about how no team in American sports is built more around whiteness itself than the Boston Celtics. Their logo is literally a white man, like the whitest white man you can imagine. Their name, the Celtics, is based on what you call a certain group of Europeans. And white people in Boston have always thought of the team as their team. They hate Kyrie for rejecting it and rejecting them. So, first let me get this out of the way. I do believe that there can be, perhaps some framing when it comes to sports logos and mascots, that should be addressed. But there's also the issue of the motive. The first of which is that people take a mascot generally because they're trying to honor or pay homage to some form of exceptional, qualities. The Minnesota Vikings didn't name themselves, the Vikings for no reason. Vikings are known to be, like an ancient warrior culture, really tough, good name for a football team. I do think that, the Redskins and the Chiefs, there's definitely two poor, not good choices basically for for sports teams. But in contrast, there was actually a college, or it might have been a high school, that had their sports collective named the Huron, and it was actually in tribute to the tribe, the Huron. And a lot of virtue signaling people on their council decided that they needed to remove that. Even when an actual chief of the Huron said, no, that's fine, that honors us. People don't name their sports teams after things that they think are inferior. Nobody names themselves the Daisies. Nobody names themselves, anything that they don't, feel has some form of admirable trait. The reason that there's a problem with the Redskins and the Chiefs is that both of those terms have been just like flat out used as racial slurs. If they wanted to use the semblance or the image of a Native American warrior, that's a different matter as long as it's a name that's not, just directly used that way. But regardless, one of the things I wanted to kind of bring to the attention of people is like, so the logo for the Boston Celtics is a leprechaun. And the reason that it's a leprechaun is because Boston is a historically Irish community. And it was never like, when he says their logo is literally a white man, the whitest white man you could imagine, as if implying that the Boston Celtics picked this logo out of like white supremacy, like to demonstrate, that this was white supremacy. One of the big problems that I have that, with racial activism in general is they present white people as a monolith. All white people are the same. All white people are accountable for the same things. And frequently I also hear, certain of the more hateful activists, racial activists saying things like white people don't have any culture, which is why they have to steal ours. That's supposedly the story behind cultural appropriation. And it's bullshit. There actually are a large number of cultures. I remember, that basically would be Caucasian, and that's why he says, their name, the Celtics, is based on what you call a certain group of Europeans. No, they're a culture. But it's one of the things I've noticed a lot is that, people don't really seem to take any interest whatsoever in cultural appropriation unless they feel it's offending people of color. You can just do whatever the hell you want with any white culture and nobody cares. Even if it would be offensive to anybody. So, for example, suggesting that, that Lucky, as he's known, the mascot for the Celtics, is just the whitest white man, would imply that that was their point, was to suggest that they picked this guy as their logo and their mascot specifically to try to demonstrate whiteness. And that's just bullshit. That's not it at all. So there were some people, thankfully, actually, oddly enough, a lot of people of color responded to Shaun on here to talk about how large of a, basically how like long of a reach this was on his part to make this suggestion. Not just about the logo, but about the idea that the Celtics itself is built around whiteness. So anyway, let's take a look at those comments. TJ Wenzel says, bro, be careful. You're going to pull a muscle with this reach. Then Damian Gordon says, have you heard of what black players have said about the fans in Boston? So Sheet Allen says, what have they said about the organization, though? Shaun didn't take his anger out on the fans. He took it out on the organization. There is a huge difference between the two. Speaking from a black man and documentarian, you are factually incorrect. This city has a bad history of racism, true. However, the Celtics have been the most progressive team in the NBA. Another person points out, you can come for the fans, but not the organization. Do your research, Shaun King. This team broke the color barrier for Africans to play and coach in the NBA. They were the first to do both. A lot of these kinds of facts have been brought to light in this thread, including the fact that the Celtics actually drafted the first black player. They had the first black coach, as was just pointed out. At one point, they had the first team to have an entirely black starting lineup. So, yeah, I would say that I would agree with them, that the notion that, the entire team is just, founded on white supremacy is just fucking stupid. So here's a photo of the man who threw a water bottle at the player in question. The player's name is Kyrie Irving. And this is him being taken away by police. Now, I'd like you to make a note of the name and the number on the back of his jersey, as it's going to be relevant later. Everybody was talking about this as if it was just a racist incident, and really not discussing the full dynamics of what was going on. And Shaun King, for example, obviously left this kind of information out. Now, I want to be clear. I can't think of any reason why a fan would be justified in throwing a bottle at somebody, but acting like it was for no reason is just dishonest. And people seizing on this idea as if it was a racist incident, it's just obviously bullshit. So there you just saw him go out of his way to walk past other players, specifically to go to the center and step on Lucky, the mascot for the Boston Celtics, the whiter than white man than you could possibly imagine, and then wipe his feet on it, or wipe his foot on it. He was making a statement. It's a very intentional point. That's another thing that a lot of people don't know all the facts, are just saying, well, who cares if he stepped on his logo? I mean, it's on the floor. Everybody steps on it. No, he knew what he was doing, and he did that to make a point to the fans that, that basically that he was disrespecting them. So, again, I was talking to you earlier about this jersey and the number on it. When people suggest that this was a racially motivated incident, let's talk a little bit about why this particular fan was wearing this jersey. You may notice a certain detail about the original person to wear this jersey that may make you question whether or not this was a racist incident. So this is the player that the individual who threw the water bottle was honoring by wearing his jersey. His name is Kevin Garnett. He's an NBA legend, NBA Hall of Famer, and obviously a Boston Celtic. So I think you might be reaching pretty damn far to suggest that this was just a racial incident. But, who knows? So, also, ironically, Mr. Garnett weighed in on the topic of Kyrie Irving's behavior with regard to the logo. So nobody going to say anything about Kyrie stomping on Lucky? We just gonna act like we didn't see that? What the fuck is going on? You can't do that. That's not cool, no, at no level. All of us need to be better. I'm just saying. Good morning to all and have a great, happy Memorial Day. So here, we inconveniently for the narrative have an African American NBA legend coming forward to say that it was inappropriate for him to, basically disrespect the logo of the Boston Celtics. And rather ironically, that just happens to be, this just happens to be the same player whose jersey was on the fellow who threw the water bottle. I've read a lot of other angry reactions from different from different fans about what he did. And again, I don't feel it justifies throwing a water bottle at anybody, but to act like, it's just the most preposterous thing in the world that anybody might take that personally, he wanted it to be taken personally. That's why he did it. So getting back to the post that started all of this, it's interesting that once again, the people who more or less make a living on professional race baiting felt the need to try to turn this into a racial issue. But there were plenty of fans in Boston who are also people of color who didn't take kindly to what happened. I also watched a video, I almost included it, from one YouTuber who happened to be African American, who literally said he wished he had actually struck him with the bottle. That he had lost all respect for, this player for doing this. So, regardless, there's a need to try to make everything into a racial incident, even if there's no rationale behind that. The other thing that's a little disturbing about this was like the notion that, okay, so we can't have logos that are literal white men. What's the problem with that? So does that mean that, the Viking logo that also happens to be a white man needs to be taken down? Are we, at what point exactly are we ever allowed to take any pride in any of our cultures? Which is another thing I plan to do a video about later. If, we need to dismantle this notion again, like I said earlier, that white people are a monolith that should all be judged accordingly, based on everything that every Caucasian has ever done, despite the fact that white people come in a large group of vastly different cultures, or as this idiot put it, certain groups of Europeans, whatever the hell that means. Predictably, he, also went out of his way to go ahead and make this a racial issue. And by he, I mean, Irving himself.
Fortunate, that sports has come to a lot of this, kind of crossroads where you're seeing a lot of old ways come up. It's been part of that. It's been that way in history in terms of entertainment and performers and sports for a long period of time, of just underlying racism and just treating people like they're in a human zoo. Throwing stuff at people, saying things. There's a certain point where it just gets to be too much. So, I called it out. I just wanted to keep it strictly basketball, and then you just see that people just feel very entitled out here. They pay for the tickets, great. I'm grateful that they're coming in to watch a great performance, but it's just, we're not at the theater. We're not throwing tomatoes and other random stuff at the people that are performing. It's too much.
So it couldn't be his behavior. It, of course, had to be racism. Couldn't have anything to do with him going out of his way to disrespect the Boston fans in their home, arena. It has to be racism. I guess let's hear what this fan has to say.
Kyrie Irving will play in front of Celtics fans in TD Garden for the first time tonight as a Brooklyn Net. Just days ago, he made waves by referencing alleged racist behavior he said he experienced from Boston fans at TD Garden in the past. I talked to Celtics fans before the game.
He was a bad leader while he was here. He quit on us while he was here. He made false promises. And I have other words that probably aren't as TV friendly. I don't think you can ignore the history around race in Boston. I also think he's collapsing two different conversations together. So he said when I was a player here, he had never experienced it himself. I think it's heightened around the league, just given everything that's gone on. It's something that shouldn't be dismissed. And I also think that's very Kyrie of him to try and change the discourse and change the narrative.
So there you had a person of color voicing basically the same kind of animus, in a very, civilized and even-handed way, in regards to that. And it is interesting that all of a sudden the problem was racism when, as that fan pointed out, Mr. Irving never complained about racism while he was in Boston, and even said that he had not encountered it. But when he needs a convenient way to go from being an asshole to being a hero, diving under the race card is a great way to go about it. So again, this is just another example of people needing to go out of their way to make something about race that's not about race. It's about somebody's shitty behavior. And mind you, once again, throwing water bottles at people is not justified. But, when you look further at Shaun's posts on this topic, you get to see how he blows everything up. My God, I'm furious. This is out of control. A Celtics fan threw a water bottle right at Kyrie Irving's head as he left the court. The players are clearly not safe. We've had more black players and their families attacked in the past week than any week in modern NBA history. It's disgusting, and the NBA and these teams are simply not doing enough about it. Period. It's getting worse. And at its root, it's bigotry and white supremacy. We are literally 6 months out of white people literally storming the Capitol. It's all connected. White Americans are angry and insecure and want to show rich black men how they feel about it. If white fans, particularly in Boston, are having any problems with insecurity, all you have to do is Google the name Larry Bird and watch a good 20 minutes of him beating the dog snot out of everybody on the court. That'll solve any insecurity you have. Although I personally don't judge as far as who I'm fans with in any sport based on their race, because I don't bring race into absolutely everything. But anyway, so be aware of people like this. He's basically, again, he's a professional race baiter. This is what he does. And again, the notion that this logo is just, hands-on white supremacy, and then the Boston Celtics are supposedly, built on, racism and white supremacy is just horse shit. Thanks for listening.